out there, cyber world. I'm kicking off my first ever spring speaker series for Silver Speech with a very special guest who is near and dear to my heart. I want to welcome my co-host for today, Miss Kayla Ireland, one of my very first students at Plymouth Center School in Plymouth, Connecticut. I was fairly green a year out of grad school. She was 3 years old, entering preschool with limited options for communication. We are here to hear from her what has changed as a 22-year-old female, an iron woman. I strongly believe that it is very important to hear it from the individuals that actually live with the challenge every day, being labeled, diagnosed, and put on the spot and put in a box and told they will have a plethora of limitations visiting one specialist to another. Let's see what Kayla has to say about that. Okay, Miss Kayla. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Marcy, for asking me to do this. My name is Kayla Ireland. I am a young adult with cerebral palsy and epilepsy. My interests include dressage, horses, technology, mathematics, and organization. My favorite things to do include spending time with family and friends, playing games, riding the quad and snowmobile, swimming, and horseback riding. My family is also very active as my sisters do competitive dance.
Wow, Kayla, thank you so much. You are a very busy girl. I have a question. What is dressage? Okay, so Kayla just sent me a chat that she will get back to me on that. Okay, next question for my girl Kayla. What is cerebral palsy?
Cerebral palsy, or CP, refers to a group of disorders affecting a person's ability to move, caused by damage to the developing brain either during pregnancy, during delivery, or shortly after birth. CP affects body movement and muscle control, coordination, and tone, in addition to reflex, posture, and balance.
Thank you so much, Kayla. As a therapist, I've heard there's definitely different types and different kinds of cerebral palsy. So I was wondering if you could tell everybody, what type of cerebral palsy do you have?
I have spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. Spastic quadriplegia is a specific type of cerebral palsy that refers to difficulty in controlling movements in the arms and the legs. Those with this form of cerebral palsy will not have muscle paralysis, but will experience jerking motions that come from stiffness in their arms and legs.
Wow, Kayla. So that must take a lot of energy to do the tasks that you do. I remember you telling me something like it takes 7 times the amount of energy that a neurotypical individual has the energy. It doesn't take them as much time. 7 times the energy. That is an astounding statistic for sure, an astounding percentage. Okay, next. So, you were 3 years old when I started with you. When did you graduate from high school?
I graduated high school in 2016. I participated in a variety of clubs and was a member of the National Honor Society.
Wow, Kayla, National Honor Society. I was also in National Honor Society. I was actually president of the National Honor Society. That was a long time ago, though. That was in 1995. Okay. So what have you been doing since graduation?
Under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, I qualified for special education services and an individualized education plan. Even though I was mainstreamed, I took advantage of the transition program. Under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it states that students with a disability can stay in the public school system until they are 21 to work on skills surrounding employment, post-secondary education, and independent living. So last school year was my last school year in the public school system. Since fall 2017, I have been taking basic college courses one class at a time. However, this semester I chose to try 2 and I'm 2/3 done with the semester. I chose to do fewer courses at a time as a college course is more intense than a full high school schedule even though college classes only meet once or twice a week.
Wow, Kayla, that's intense. It's a lot. Yes, college moves a lot quicker than high school. And you go take classes every day in high school. So I totally understand the material is extensive, lots of reading, lots of writing. And that's a lot, again, for somebody developing neurotypically, right? So it takes 7 times the energy to do the tasks that they ask you, and yet you do it, right? With no complaining.
A college course is 15 weeks where it takes regular school 9 months to get through the curriculum. On top of the curriculum speed, it takes me longer to write an assignment between figuring out what I want to say, how I want to say it, and I type slower due to my fine motor skills. Also, I get tired after typing for a while, so I have to take breaks accordingly, but I get everything done on time. For example, along with getting an A for Composition 1, one of my papers got published in Fab. As mentioned in the preface, the Fab is a collection of some of the most polished prose written by students in Composition 1 and 2.
Wow, that's so impressive. It's really an honor to be chosen to have a paper published, especially since college you have so many more students to choose from in their writing. So that is amazing. So Kayla just communicated to me that she was chosen out of thousands. And as you're seeing here, Kayla is communicating via an iPad with an iPad application. And also she's communicating with me on the chat in Zoom. So there's technology for her has been such a moving experience, especially since when I started working with her, there weren't very many options back then. And 20 years later, so much has changed. And I just feel so honored that we can talk about communication and how it impacts my job and how it helps her and doesn't hinder her anymore from communicating her wants, needs, feelings, creative ideas, problem solving ideas. So it's opened her world even more than before. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about your communication.
Yeah.
Please share on how you do communicate.
Due to speech difficulties, I am considered nonverbal, so I primarily communicate through sign language and technology like an augmentative and alternative communication (AAC) device. With immediate family and others that know my ways of communication well, I fingerspell, verbalize some letters and words, and of course use body language.
Yeah, so Kayla, I remember, when we used to work together, those were our options, sign language, just pictures, objects, eye gaze, all of those things, were helpful to you in the beginning. But as a child, your language expands and it gets more complicated and you have to share so much more. And so technology has helped you do that. So tell me what technology you currently use.
I communicate with the rest of the world through an AAC device like a Dynavox or communication app on my iPad. We experienced a lot of frustrating and intense issues with my Dynavox constantly freezing, so after many years, I switched to a communication app on my iPad. Even though fingerspelling and verbalizing are the fastest and most accessible to me, I have strategies to be as efficient as possible when using my communication app on my iPad. All AAC devices come with pre-programmed grids of folders and buttons to formulate sentences together. However, I use the keyboard with predictive text as I find it to better fit my needs. With that said, I do pre-program certain things like this interview to save time and energy.
So I just wanted to show everybody, Kayla had shared with me what it looks like on her computer, and that this is a grid that they show on her computer if you choose to have pictures and pre-programmed pictures. So she was telling me that she prefers, and like she just explained, that she sometimes has the conversations that are planned out for her to help her communicate on one board. And then on the other board, she has predictive text. And she chooses to communicate this way because it gives her more of an open-ended conversation versus a very limited conversation. So I just wanted to show everybody what she does, what she's seeing, because it's hard for me to see her board. So she shared with me that information. Okay. So Kayla, let's continue. Thank you so much for all of this amazing information. It's just, we spoke about how I don't work with a lot of children and adults right now that use alternative or augmentative communication. So she's my teacher. She's educating me and everybody else here on how it works. Okay. Now this is important to me because this helps me improve what I do and why I do what I do. And I'm always, like I said in the beginning, we as specialists, as therapists, we need to hear from the client, the student, the patient, how to better assist our patients. So I want to know from your experience, how have speech language pathologists influenced your life or helped you?
Speech language pathologists have helped me with feeding and communication. The muscles we learn for feeding are the muscles we learn for speaking too. When I was younger, speech language pathologists helped me in finding ways to communicate functionally my needs, wants, and social greetings. They helped convey to other people that I understand everything and research the appropriate means to share my knowledge and ideas via communication to use in a variety of settings. They taught me feeding techniques to help me strengthen and shape my muscles to safely chew, swallow, and say words that would be clear to my listeners.
Thank you, Kayla. That was, it's nice to hear the things that I actually implement into my sessions. Speech language pathologists, we cover so much, but it's nice to know that, we have been of help to you. I think that you and I have really developed some great ideas here for including another segment into how cerebral palsy affects you in the community too, and what kinds of activities you do and you do enjoy, and what other therapists influence your life. So there's so much to talk about. I do want to give you the opportunity to ask me any questions that you would like me to answer.
Now I have some questions for you, Marcy. What is speech language pathology?
So we covered a little bit in this interview together, but speech language pathologist covers speaking, it covers feeding, it covers social skills, it covers reading, it covers writing. We basically are a communication specialists. So a lot of people don't understand why we do feeding, but we do feeding because the muscles that we learn for speaking are the muscles we learn for communicating. So if there is any breakdown in something that happens from a feeding perspective, we need to strengthen those muscles. We need to shape those muscles in a way. And a lot of children are born with premature or with tubes or with cerebral palsy. So we have to train the muscles to work appropriately because our patients didn't breastfeed necessarily, or they didn't drink from a bottle right away. So we have to train the muscles. And then from a communications perspective, if a child is not speaking, how are we going to get them to speak? And there's so many different ways to do that. And we work from birth to end of life for speech pathologists. It doesn't end. It's always, we're always helping people of all different diagnoses, different ages. And we just, my mantra is your voice, your life. If you don't have a voice, nobody can hear you and listen and change your life for the better. So communication is improving the quality of every client's life, basically.
What are some general goals of speech language pathology?
So when I look at a client, when I get them, it depends on, what their needs are. But, my general goals are, basically improve your overall speech intelligibility if people have difficulty understanding you. We improve receptive language skills. So what you're understanding, we want to improve understanding of language. Expressive language skills, we want to increase expressive language skills. So How does somebody ask questions? How does somebody formulate sentences? Are they using complete sentences? Are they using the sentences grammatically correct? We do pragmatic skills, social skills. Are we turn taking? Are we reading a person's cue to make sure that they read us correctly, we read them correctly? Body language. I love how we've been having conversations such as, I asked Kayla, what happens if somebody doesn't understand you? And me, myself, I went through hearing loss because of a medication that I took for my health, and I lost my hearing. And I need this for my job. And I struggle with communicating now sometimes because I can't hear the message. So then that's frustrating to both the listener and the communicator. So, these are some goals that we do work on. And then we do feeding, we do strengthening oral motor muscles, tongue, cheeks, lips, jaw. So those are some goals that we use for feeding. Range of motion, making sure our articulators are, and then we work on writing skills. And, Kayla shared with me, sometimes she writes, she talks about not being detailed necessarily. So why or how come, right? So we work on writing goals, because once you can speak, then it's difficult to write sometimes after you learn to speak. So we work on writing, telling narratives, so telling a procedural narrative, how to do something. We work on story retell, tell me something you've read, what was the story about. And then we also work on personal narratives. Tell me your favorite vacation. And so you have to speak that, and then you have to read that. So those are some of the goals that we work on as speech pathologists.
What are some basic goals of speech language pathology for a nonverbal individual?
So when speech therapists get a nonverbal child, we want to see what they understand first, right? So do they understand yes-no questions? Yes-no questions are the simplest question. So can they shake their head, yes or no? Can they sign, yes or no? Can they eye gaze at a yes or no? And even before that, we have to see, can they point? So we want to see what their best way of communicating. An eye gaze might not be consistent. They might only be able to move an elbow. So we have to use the elbow for them to point to objects to see what they understand. So we do yes-no questions. We look at, can they identify objects? What objects do they identify? What people in their lives do they identify? Do they recognize mom and dad and sister, teacher? So those are basic nonverbal goals. Identifying objects, then identifying objects to pictures, and then pictures to pictures. So, we start at a very basic level and then build on their skills.
Do you believe in multi-modes of communication, or just using one form of communication?
I am about multimodal communication. I believe in whatever works, use it, and use it well, and then keep building on different forms of communication. And as you can see, Kayla, when we first started working together and we were getting to know each other, I was trying to figure out, what you knew and how are we going to get you to communicate this, all of the information in your brain. And you're intelligent, smart, witty, your sense of humor. How are we going to get your sense of humor out? And this was at 3 years old, and so that is super important. And as you can see, everybody watching this video, is we've been using multi-modes of communication. So Kayla sometimes answers verbally, sometimes she uses her device, and then sometimes she writes me in the chat. So on Zoom. And she's also uses sign with her family and finger spelling. So it's what works with that person, and where you are, what environment you're in. So, you say at home, I use a lot of sign language, or I speak. So that works in the home. And sometimes I remember this exactly when we had a device for you, like you can't take it home. You had to leave it in school. You can't, it's too heavy, or, and they're expensive. So then the school district's like, you can only keep it in school and you can't take it home. So that's really frustrating for the family and also the person using it. So you have to be ready to use all forms of communication.
Now that iPads and tablets have apps for communication, are companies like Dynavox suffering? If not, do you think they will be?
Wow, that's an excellent question. I have to say that, we're like a one-pop shop community. We want our device to do everything, right? And Apple does a very good job of that, right? You're using an iPad, and an iPad has different apps that cater to your needs. I haven't used Dynavox since we were together, and it was there was a lot of glitches, a lot of frustration. I'm sure they keep increasing their their levels, but it's not like the iPad. And I always would get frustrated because the video games that these kids play and adults play, they work perfectly, right? But then when I want a device for my client to work appropriately, the glitches were extensive and frustrating, and they weren't quick like the video games out there. So Kayla had an excellent question that she wrote me in the chat. She asked, why do you think Apple is better advanced? And, I read Steve Jobs' book because I think he's fantastic. I think, he is a think outside the box. He was one that couldn't learn doing education the way everybody else wants education to be. And when he created the Apple computer, he wanted for a 6-year-old child or 3-year-old child to be able to navigate. And that's the iPad. A child can navigate it better than anybody. And that was his goal. So I think that that's why it's so advanced. And, the money is there. The support is there. The scientists are there. The computer engineers are there. So I think that that's why it is so advanced. And with AAC companies, it's very different because the population, there's a lot of special education needs. However, money is spent, with therapies and things like that. And it's probably harder to raise money for, a standalone company versus Apple. So I would think that that's the reason.
As a speech and language pathologist, how do you feel about tablets versus Big Aac devices for communication?
Yeah, again, I can remember with your old device, it was clunky. It was hard to detach from your wheelchair. It was not easy friendly, right? So Apple is light. It's you can see it. You can make changes to it too, but I felt like the big ones were so limiting. So I really do think the Apple, it's light. It's you can put it in a bag. You can carry it anywhere, and that's what you needed. Was like, in a panic when we needed to communicate with you, we had to take it out, set it up. It would not turn on. So I can remember all of that.
Do you agree with the labels verbal and nonverbal due to misconceptions? Why or why not?
Well, Kayla, that's a great question. I feel like, I work with so many different diagnoses. And when you first get the diagnosis, doctors or specialists, they diagnose. They don't see the potential we're the therapist, so we do the work. And I always say, like, you can't put somebody in a box and tell them that they're going to be nonverbal. We don't know, with work and with therapy and in the intensity of the therapy and the different therapeutic methods and theories. And, there's so much research happening in speech language pathology and other disciplines that, we have to use semantics. So we have to say, they're nonverbal, but, I describe what I see. So if a child is putting their lips together, but they're not saying anything, I just say the child puts their lips together for M, they're not voicing for that vowel. So instead of putting labels, really specific labels on somebody, I describe the behavior, because then that's what I work on next is the voicing. So if a child is just voicing, that's still speaking, right? You're making a sound. So that was a really good question, but I don't like to put anybody in a box because I've seen miracles happen. Through everything, through Western medicine, Eastern medicine, all kinds of different therapies. So I am, equal opportunity to advance, no matter what you're diagnosed with.
Why do I have a language barrier when writing? I know and apply all the English sentence structure, vocabulary, grammar. Why do I have to work on expanding my thoughts to be an appropriate length with details? Is there a better explanation than just that sign language is short and sweet?
Yeah, so I remember, we spoke a little bit about this, and I think it is because in the beginning, when we work with you, we work on functional communication. So when you were unable to communicate feelings, or, if you were hungry, or what kind of food you wanted, it was simple pictures. So it was a noun or a basic verb, right? Or a functional word. So then now, your brain, even though you already had all that inside your head, right? But we didn't have the tools to get you to do that, right? But now it's different. So it's still, it still happens where sometimes you're communicating. We call that agrammatical. So you speak sort of like in a robotic way, right? Or you write in a robotic way where you don't leave tenses off, or you might not use a more sophisticated language sentence. So I think that that's what happens. Yeah, so Kayla was saying that, she's taken a lot of English classes. She wrote that in the chat again. See, we're using multimodal communication. Yeah, I think that it just, it takes practice. It takes time. And, and because you're using technology also doesn't pick up on past tense, future tense sometimes. It's getting better, right? But it's not gonna, it's also, you're, like you said, you're using a lot of energy to do these tasks. So that's another thing, right? So I think that, but when I look at your writing and what you've sent me, your writing is excellent. So, that's you being very critical of yourself and being that overachiever.
Mm.
That's it too.
Why do I have a difficulty time explaining pain? For example, I can tell the listener the location of the pain, but I have a hard time explaining it even though I know all the describing words.
So that's a good question. I think that, everybody has, in some way, a hard time explaining pain. And we spoke about how, people's tolerance for pain is very different. And some people, it's perception of pain. Because, some people, they'll go through a million things and you never know they're even in pain, right? And then other people who are always in pain and they're constantly in pain and they talk about the pain all the time. So pain is sort of is subjective anyway, right? So they try to objectify pain by saying from 0 to 10, how do you feel? And it's hard even, when I can communicate, to really know, is that a 5 or a 10? So pain is hard to objectify, right? And then, like you said, you can tell where it is, but it's hard to explain like the level of pain. So I think that that's universal. I think it's hard to explain, and you could use like excruciating pain, very bad pain, It's killer. It's killing me, you know? So, you know, we all go through that. It's just, I think because you're the only one in your family who has cerebral palsy, right? So they don't know what it's like to live through your body, right? And so it's hard to say, like, you know, it's 10 times worse because I have this. And do we know that, right? Do we know that you experience more pain than someone who doesn't have it? We don't know. So that's such a good question. It's so hard to explain. But I think, like, just learning more words about pain and, like, the levels, I think, like you said, you know, the describing words, and just increasing that. So you know better, you know, to alert someone, I'm in pain. It's excruciating. I can't take it anymore. You know, those are words that, you know, people use. So super important question.
Why is the proper terminology pathology if most other services are therapies?
So let me think about that for a minute. Can you repeat the question?
Why is the proper terminology pathology if most other services are therapies?
So I guess I'm having a hard time understanding. So pathology, like, you want to know why it's called speech language pathology? Okay. Yeah, so people actually ask me that all the time. So you'll hear speech therapy, you'll hear speech language pathology. You know, so you'll hear different, it's the same, you know, it's the same thing, basically. So pathology is like the diagnoses, right? What are you presenting with, right? Speech language pathology. So you'll hear feeding specialist, you'll hear voice specialist, you'll hear, so those are the pathologies that we work with, right? There's different diagnoses. So speech language therapists, we're the therapizing, I've heard the word therapizing lately, but therapy, we're giving the therapy. So pathology is the diagnoses. You're right. So Kayla mentioned that OT and PT, or physical therapy and occupational therapy, don't have pathologists at the end of their name. And it totally depends on the field, the career, and what they call themselves, correct? So, that's their choice. Yeah, it'd be interesting. Physical pathologist, occupational pathologist, right? So yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to investigate that further. I go by speech language pathologist. Sometimes I use it interchangeably, actually. It totally depends. But I actually feel that it sounds pretentious, and sometimes you don't want to be using those big words. It can be intimidating, or you want to speak. You want to just use speech therapist, depending. I use it interchangeably, though, and it doesn't bother me if somebody calls me speech therapist versus speech pathologist. It's semantics, and semantics keep changing in our world today, right? So it's super important. That's a really good question, and I actually don't know why physical therapists and occupational therapists don't use that. So I will find out. So,
name speech language pathology something else, would you? If so, what?
Oh, I love that question. I think I was born to do this. I think this was my profession. I don't know what I would be. Actually, I think I would have gone to med school and have been an ear, nose, and throat doctor. That's what I would have done. She told me I answered the wrong question.
Language. If you could name speech language pathology something else, would you?
Oh, see,
What?
So that was my hearing loss. So I had a I didn't hear the question correctly. No, I think it's an appropriate word or series of words together that describes our profession. But, I think I always I'm a communication specialist. I'm a communication expert. So I also use that, even though it's not, what we put at the end of our name. But those are really, really good questions. I love it. So she just yelled at me and said I have 2 more questions.
We talked about feeding and communication. Can you discuss how just drooling is a skill that has to be learned to be controlled?
Yeah, so drooling, actually, I work on drooling a lot. And, it's not with just, cerebral palsy population. We see it with Down syndrome. We see it with children developing neurotypically. So usually it's breathing or adenoids. Your adenoids are enlarged, or it's muscle control, right? So, and it's a hygiene issue, because if we're in COVID, we're in a pandemic right now, and saliva is full of germs and has can get people sick. So we work on controlling the saliva, and there's actually a statistic. I think it's you're supposed to swallow like 4 to 6 times a minute is like the I'll have to double check on that, but we swallow a certain amount of times in a minute. So we work on, that's how we get more control over it, is to give a number, and also just working on games to get you to remember to swallow. And then oral motor work, popping those lips. We use tongue depressors to hold the lips in place. We add weights. It's like a gym to strengthen the lip muscles. And then our cheeks we don't realize that our cheeks and our jaw and our tongue have to do with drooling. So I have a lot of kids that come to me and they're swallowing with their teeth. So there's a lot of water that comes out of their mouth. So our lips, we swallow when our lips are sealed. And at rest, like you're sitting here talking to me right now, your lips are closed and you're breathing through your nose. If you can't breathe through your nose, your mouth is going to drop and fluid's going to come out, right? So at rest, without speaking, everybody's lips should be closed and breathing through your nose and out your mouth. But if there's blockage in your nose, very important. And then muscle control, even from the core, sitting up straight. If you're have poor posture, you're going to open your mouth and drool.
Based on today's segment, do you have anything else to say about speech-language pathology, feeding, or communication?
I just want to say that I love my job and that we will have a job in lifetimes to come because, just like technology has helped individuals like yourself tremendously, and it also hinders communication if you already you're built with the system to communicate, right? So too much iPad time or too much Zoom time or too much television time will hinder your ability to communicate because you're not communicating. You're just sitting there, not using your voice. So Kayla just has one more comment before we conclude. She says, I would think TV would promote speech. So she's saying, by listening, you're learning, right, through visuals. And that is absolutely true. However, it doesn't give you opportunity to answer back or communicate using verbalizations. Some programs do, but there's, you need personal interaction, live time to practice communication and, and body cues and personal space and, taking 3 conversational turns, stopping and taking 4 conversational turns, listening, interrupting, all of those things you don't get through a video. Okay? So, this was our first Silver Speech speaking series with Kayla Ireland from Plymouth, Connecticut, and I'm here in New York City. We really, really enjoyed working together, and we will be doing a segment number 2 next week. So we look forward to your feedback, your comments, your questions, and we will get back to you on that. So thank you so much. All right. And Kayla says, thank you. And we are back to work. Thanks so much, everybody.